Hey everyone, welcome to the first video of April. This one here is a step-by-step tutorial video on creating an environment using a natural palette. As you can see here, despite it being a natural palette, it's still very vibrant, but essentially not as, like the crazy colors that I would usually use for my other pieces, such as the reds, blues, purples, and all that, right? So for this one here, I'm going to be breaking it all down for you guys and showing you from stage 0 till the end, all right? So let's get straight into this one, guys. So first off, much like usual, I'm going to be setting up a background. Now that's usually the sky. Okay, so I've just used the gradient tool and I've selected a light blue, a light muted blue, and then a very light blue. Okay, so that's basically my sky background I've got there. Okay, then we're going to start off by just blocking in some shapes as usual. Right, now the shapes here is a very important stage, as I always stress about, okay, because 80% of the shape you create in this early stage will most likely and usually follow through to the end, unless you go through some drastic changes, of course. Alright, now we're going to start off with a horizon line, and then having this horizon line is going to really help us figure out how our composition is going to sit and how our objects and elements are going to sit. Okay, so I'm just using a mid-tone blue here, not too dark and not too light, and I'm just going to be creating some shapes and just seeing what comes out. So what I'm doing here is I've set up my horizon line, which is that horizontal line, that straight horizontal line that you see. Now I'm just creating some silhouettes of some grass and bushes just to break that line a little bit. So we're going to play around with adding some bushes, some trees maybe, and yeah, definitely some grass. Okay. Now this is just to break that very straight mechanical looking horizon line that I've drawn early on. Alright, so I'm just going to create some shadows, some silhouettes here. Alright, now I'm just going to leave that as is, and then behind everything that's been created so far, we're going to select a slightly lighter blue, more on the muted side, you can see there. Right, it's got like a bit of a blue and a bit of a violet touch to it. It's very muted, so it almost looks like a grey. Right, now we're just going to block in our main mountain, so I know this is going to be one of my big mountains here. Now I'm just going to block in some shapes, right, and just find something that's interesting, find something that's suitable to be your focal point, and that could represent and visualize the story that you're trying to tell here. Now once you're happy with your mountain or your focal point in its silhouette form, you can move ahead, and then we're going to go back to the ground plane that we created early on. We're going to turn it to more of a dark green from the blue that it was before. Then we're going to open up a new layer and then add a clipping mask to it, and then select a slightly lighter green, or probably quite a lighter green. And then we're going to paint in some textures and details for what the ground plane might look like. Now as you will already know, I love playing with shapes in my ground planes. You can see the way I've created them. I create them in a way where I'm creating gestural lead-in lines. Okay, so what these lead-in lines do, it essentially leads the story. It leads the eye. It leads the eyes of the viewers towards my focal point. Okay, so it's almost like even if there's no physical footpath on my ground plane, the textures that I create basically do that for me, if you know what I mean. So you can see here the zigzags and stuff. It's basically representing a trail that will lead the eye. Alright, now once I've created a texture that I like, I'm going to lock that layer up with the pixel lock function, or alpha lock on Procreate, and I'm just going to grab a lighter green as a highlight and just add some highlights there just to signify where the light is coming from and where it's touching. Right. Now as part of the design, as I just briefly talked about footpaths, we're going to add an actual footpath this time, and it's going to follow the same kind of rhythm that I've got for my grass texture. So even if you don't create a footpath for your grass texture, for example, that's okay because you should or might already have some sort of trail in the texture. But if not, then you can also add in a footpath like what I'm doing here as another way to lead the eye, lead the viewers, tell the story, lead the story, okay? Now I'm just trying to find the right value for the footpath so it matches the shadows of the grass and the highlights of the grass. Okay, now I'm happy with the rhythm and the gesture of the ground plane. I'm just going to click back over to the main mountain here. Because that's our focal point, I'm going to be spending a lot of time on here. So I'm going to get to it right away. Now I'm just going to select a lighter grey and use that as our mountain highlights. Okay, now I'm going to be just creating some textures and highlights for the mountains here. Play around with your textures, play around with the rhythm of the flow of your brush strokes just to create some dimensions for your mountain. Alright. Now you can see here I'm brushing and I'm erasing, I'm brushing and erasing, because technically when you're brushing and you're creating something, right, that's painting. And at the same time, when you're erasing, you're essentially creating textures in its own right. So brushing and erasing, you could say yin and yang. They're both just as important to each other. That's how I see it. And that's why I always brush and erase, because sometimes when you're so focused on brushing, the additive aspect of it can become quite it can become quite mechanical. So I like to balance that out with a bit of contrast, and that contrast being brush and eraser. I go back to the eraser and I erase to get another form of textures where I won't necessarily get from actually brushing in, right? So positives and negatives, right? So it's very important to be creative and play around with these types of approaches, and be creative with it, and you can get creative. So what I just did before was I grabbed a lighter grey, not necessarily white, and I painted in some snow. Okay, now I want to make the snow like way thinner texture, so I've just minimized my brush size to create them. Now, don't forget that to create dimensions for your mountain, you don't want it looking flat. You want it look like these dimensions in it. So what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing a bit of a muted blue to act as the snow shadows. All right, because our sky is more on the blue tone. The reflective for the colors for the shadows of the snow should reflect some of that sky color, right? So that's basically how the lighting is going to work in this scene. Okay, so as you can see here, I've got the lighting, the light side of the snow kind of going from the top to going diagonally to the left. Now I want to make the shadows go the opposite. Now that's going to help me create a 3D looking dimension for my mountain so it doesn't look too flat. Okay, now so I'm pretty happy with how the main mountain's looking. It's still really rough right now, but we will come back to render and refine it up later. Now it's time to add in more mountains in the distance to create more atmosphere, to create more depth. Right. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to grab a lighter grey compared to the dark grey of our main mountain here. So whatever's further back, it gets lighter, right? So naturally we're going to select a lighter grey around that same kind of value in the palette. But yeah, just go a bit lighter, and we're going to paint in some shapes. And remember, when things get lighter as they get further out, so do the elements themselves. So we're going to make sure that the bounces and the edges for these further back mountains are a bit smaller than what we've got in front of it. Okay, so what we're going to do is just create a few and then see how the composition looks, and if we're happy with it, we'll then move on. Alright. As you can see here, I'm just kind of replaying with the main mountain here to see if I could find some more interesting shapes. I tend to really get drawn to sharp mountain tops. I just feel like it looks a bit more striking and a little bit more interesting. Alright, now next step, we cannot forget to add fog in between your elements, guys. Now I always talk about this. Atmosphere, fog, helps with depth, separation, and readability in your whole compositional scene. Alright, so in front of every element that you've created so far, such as the mountains at the back, the main mountains in the mid there, and then the trees, we're going to paint in some fog in between these layers. So all you got to do is just open up a new layer in between each of these elements, right? And then color pick from the sky, for example, or a lighter color than that, and just brush in some fog. Okay, and then this is going to create some really intense atmosphere, and it's going to really make your scene much more readable. Alright, now after the atmosphere pass, you can then move to the back, right at the back, so right in front of the sky gradient. We're just going to pick a even lighter you could say light blue, but not as white. For example, we don't want white. We don't want to go as white as the snow there. So we're just going to go with like light blue. You can tell on the color picker there that it's still quite much below the white spectrum. So we're just going to paint in some clouds, create like a nice flow. Now, in terms of flow, because my environment here is landscape and it's quite wide, I want to make sure that my clouds represent that same kind of design aesthetic as well. So we're just going to sketch in some clouds, play around with the shapes here. So usually when I have the main shape down, I move on to the next step, and I come back to rework on it a little bit later. Okay. Now, so you can see I'm experimenting with kind of just brushing in the shadow part of the clouds with a nice soft brush to get like a nice soft feel to the clouds, right? So sometimes I like playing around with that. Sometimes I don't have it at all, right? But you know, it's good to play around with these type of things. Now from here, after the clouds, I'm just going to be going back to rework on the main mountains here. Because I feel like the main composition itself here has already been established. I've got all the building blocks here. I mean, they're all very rough, but it's there. You know, like if you blur your vision and you look at it from a distance, for example, you can see that it already resembles a solid foundation of a landscape. Okay, so I'm just going to go in. I'm going to fix up some of the snow areas, the shadow areas of the snow, and then find some nice rhythm with it. And just detail the mid-mountain here. I'm going to be spending a lot of time creating and reworking areas in this main mountain because that is my focal point and I want that to really show out. Alright, now I'm really happy with how the mid-mountain has turned out. Now I'm going to move on and work on the mid-ground here. So I'm going to add another layer in front of those trees that we had beforehand, and I'm going to create some smaller bushes just to create another layer of separation and elements just to make it seem like a very nature-heavy environment. Okay, so you know when you're out in the nature, there's lots going on. There's lots of layers. There's lots of things kind of separating from each other. So we're just going to keep building on this. So I'm just going to create some bushes here. I'm going to keep them quite dark. I'm just using a dark green for this. And you find some nice shapes, find some nice silhouettes for it. Now once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and populate my whole environment a little bit more. I'm going to be adding in things like rocks and bushes, but I'm going to create it in a way where it's not so distracting. So I'm going to make sure that they're kind of sitting idle on its own, sitting somewhere where it's not blocking the main viewpoint and it's not blocking the main walkway in a sense, because that walkway is, a pathway for someone to walk in this world, but at the same time it's a design element created to lead the eye. So as you can see here from the foreground leading out to the main mountain there, it's a trail to lead the eye. So I'm going to make sure that whatever elements I'm creating, I'm not blocking this view. Now from here I actually decided to break up the midground a little bit by adding some water. So what I did was I just added in a rectangle block there, and for the color I've just selected the same kind of blue that's in the sky there, because usually a lot of water is reflective of the sky and the atmosphere, right? So I've just the best way to do that is I like to just color pick from the sky and then paint in my block here. So I'm just kind of experimenting on whether I want it to be segments of water or if I want to go back to the rectangle block. I did end up going back to the long horizontal block, but I'm just going to play around to see if it works here. But eventually it didn't work, and I preferred that straight block there from earlier. Okay. So as you can see here, I did end up deciding to go back to the horizontal block that I had at the beginning. Now for the reflection, I would just, everything on top above the waterline, so that waterline hits over to the horizon line, you see. So everything above that, I'm just going to just duplicate all those layers, merge it together, and then I'm going to flip it vertically and then clip it onto that that block of water there, right? And then add a bit of a blur and then drop the opacity, and you can get like a really nice reflection, accurate reflection of your environment there. So you see I'm just playing around with the placement of it just to make sure that it sits right. But most times out of 10, if you use that method of creating reflections into water and you clip onto that water, you will get basically accurate representation as a reflection. So it's a really quick way to create that. Alright guys, now we've pretty much reached the final push of this artwork here. So from here on to the end of the video, I'm just going to be rendering. I'm just going to be exerting the same basically approaches to what I've been teaching you from the beginning of this video till here, such as adding the details, changing your brush size to add smaller details to give off a look that the details are really small, meaning that these elements are very far away. Okay. So from the rest of this video here, starting from here, I'm just going to be rendering, refining, and touching things up. So I won't be talking, but you'll get the gist of pretty much what I'm doing. I'm just repeating the process until things are more polished. Okay, so hope you guys found this helpful so far, and I hope you guys continue to enjoy the video, and I'll see you back at the end. And here we are with the finished illustration. I hope you guys managed to catch on to basically the whole process of how this was developed. Hope you guys found this really helpful, and once again, as usual, thank all you guys for your support. It really means a lot to me, and I've got so much planned for this month, and I can't wait to release more and more for you guys. Alright, so this month we will be doing a tutorial idea submissions and then a poll to see which tutorial we get for this month's exclusive video. Alright, so that will come soon, and I hope you guys have got some ideas in mind already to put forward, and then we will go through the shortlisting process as usual. Alright, so exciting times guys, and I'll see you there.